basically moderating. Sabyasachi will be generally chipping in.
Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Ma'am, can we start?
Yes, Bijani, please start. We are, I mean, it's already 9. People can join in later also. We can start.
Good morning to one and all present here. I, Dr. Bijani Mishra, on behalf of Matri College, once again welcome you to the last day of the Equinox-2022, the annual international conference on the theme Expanding Frontiers of Knowledge. We have Professor Ritambhara Hebbar amongst us today, and she is going to critically examine the debate on indigeneity in India and epistemic barriers in exploring new ways of approaching the tribal questions in India. And the title of her talk is End of the Road, Tribes and Anthropological Enterprise. Ritambhara Hebbar is professor at and dean at the School of Development Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. She has over 20 years of experience in teaching and has taught both at the undergrad and postgrad levels. She has specialized in tribal studies, specifically on tribal culture, movement for self-rule, and governance. Her publications include her book titled Ecology, Equity, and Freedom, Engagement with Self-Rule in Jharkhand. The book is an ethnography of the struggle for self-rule in Jharkhand. She is also engaged in a research on tribes in South India to comprehend the nature of anthropological and sociological research on them and the contemporary situation of tribes in this region. Her other areas of research and writing include social institutions and development experiences, rurality, rural society and social change, and sociology and social anthropology in India. She teaches on related themes such as understanding Indian society, tribes in the contemporary world, tribes in India, qualitative research, approaches and methods, methodological issues in developmental research, social exclusion in India, environment and society, anthropology and development. All over to you, ma'am. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mishra, for such a kind sort of introduction. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of Equinox. It's a real privilege and honor to be here, especially because of the theme. Also, I mean, other than, of course, getting to meet, all of you and interact with the scholarship in Delhi. I mean, with being in Mumbai, one rarely gets a chance to actually come to Delhi and have a conversation. So it's great to be a part of this. The theme particularly is of great interest to me, the expanding frontiers of knowledge. And when Dr. Tripathi had approached me, I sort of said yes to it, although a little hesitantly because I didn't know how, whether I'd be able to justify my presence in the conference, because this is work in progress. I'm still thinking on these lines. I had promised Professor Sabyasachi that I'm going to write a full-fledged paper on this a while back. So this is still work in progress. I've written a bit of it. So what I'll be doing today is reading out the paper that I've written, but for the convenience of the audience, because listening to papers online becomes a little tedious. So I've made a presentation so that people can get a sense of what the main points are, right? So I'll just share screen. I hope you can see this. I hope it's visible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's visible, ma'am.
Maybe it's better I do it.
ठीक है हो गया
Oh yeah, na? Okay. I thought you said. Okay, it's visible well, no? Okay, so like it was just announced by Dr. Mishra, my paper is End of the Road, Tribes and the Anthropological Enterprise. So let me just quickly take you through the abstract to begin with, so that it sort of sets the tone of the paper. So the abstract basically reads is that the theorization of tribes, specifically in the context of India, is characterized by the politics of elimination. Now, this is a grand claim I'm making. Please bear with me as I sort of explain what I mean. Here, elimination means that tribes were never allowed to be. Dubbed primitive and backward, they were given no choice but to move towards civilization, caste, class, and the mainstream. The progression towards these goalposts for being tribes to something else was considered natural and desirable. They were a people in eternal transition, a euphemism for their active elimination. Who then are tribes? And how do we move out of this impasse? The paper reintroduces this question and presents some preliminary reflections on the same. So the paper actually has 4 sections, mainly 3. 4th section is more like a conclusion. I begin with the introduction, which will foreground the paper's main arguments by presenting a brief historical overview of anthropology's engagement with tribes, not just in India, but the world over, and its influence on how tribes were conceptualized thereof. The 2 main sections really are eliminating the self and the elimination of agency. So these are 2 dimensions in which I try to illustrate my point about the politics of elimination. Now, much of the theorization on tribes has paved way for the elimination of the sense of identity, autonomy of tribes. And this is what I'm arguing here. So I provide a brief background to the tribal question as it's developed through colonialism in India and subsequently became a cause of concern in post-independent India. The second main section is the elimination of agency. And I go with the assumption that tribal movements actually are sites of, or that express agency of tribes, of what's happening in their life and their sort of response to it. So the section critically reflects on the theorization of tribal movements to argue that it has only carried forward the politics of elimination. Because what I basically I'm arguing is that the theorization really does not capture the dynamic nature of that resistance that tribal movements have expressed through their resistance. And the substance is missing. What we get is a classification, but the substance of that critique has not really been captured as much within anthropology, is what I'm arguing. And the last section is basically, which is a concluding section and a very short section called the mainstream and the saga of elimination. And I won't sort of spill the beans here, I'll sort of summarize it in the end. Okay, so I'll just read out my paper, but these are some of the points that I've drawn from that section for you to sort of go through as I read. Now, tribes have been subjected to an existential crisis, not of their making, but by the politics against them. Their marginalization through British rule and post-independent India is iniquitous. Much has transpired over the last 3 centuries, making it impossible to condense it. Summarized here are some of that history's highlights that foreground the paper's main argument. It has been a tumultuous journey for tribes. They have had to encounter changes in cataclysmic proportion. It has been a prolonged saga of displacement from land and forest, following the conversion of tribal areas into an industrial military complex. Land and forest regimes were recognized to accommodate factories, mines, plantations, field firing ranges, military and railway cantonments, steel companies and townships, natural reserves and parks. Tribal areas witnessed an influx of outsiders or settlers, mostly traders, merchants, planters, skilled white and blue collar employees who outnumbered tribes, reducing them to a minority and erasing all traces of a tribal landscape in these regions. Wolf, and I'm referring to Patrick Wolf. Basically, it's a book titled Settler Colonialism and the Transformation of Anthropology. And I draw a lot from his work too. Wolf terms the settler colonization as an invasion that cannot be reduced to an event. It is a structure dictated by the settler colonial imperative without regard for tribal communities' social and economic organization. This purging of the foundation of their way of being drove tribes to resist and challenge these changes. Tribal rebellions and movements are enduring features of the resistance to being effaced. These movements have shaped their sense of self, identity, and community under these changed circumstances. The historical and political nature of how their sense of identity evolved and diversified cannot be stressed enough while engaging with the tribal question in India or elsewhere. Ironically, this complex and deeply disturbing encounter of tribes with settler colonization has remained on the margins of anthropological theorization on tribes. Anthropology has been obsessed with questions about who they are, framing them in an existential trap wherein they are their negation. Not what they are, but what they become, the people in the making. The earliest, universal, and most dominant theorization of tribes is that they were a people from a previous stage of evolution who could not keep pace with human progress and represented an infantile state. They were outside of human civilization and stuck in a time warp. Levi-Strauss succinctly explains this when he states that societies spread out in space were mistaken for those spread out in time. Tribes were considered living specimens of humanity's past. They drew tremendous scientific interest in substantiating theories about evolution of the earliest humans to the most evolved modern Caucasian man. Anthropology channeled the West's search for self-understanding through different areas of comparative interest: the mental and sensory capacity of the primitive man, material culture, religion, and race, all intending to illustrate the superiority of the West. This self-serving theorization reverberated with the politics of the time and provided the intellectual foundation for colonial rule worldwide. Anthropology shouldered the white man's burden by patronizing tribes. However, it is now also known that what was being patronized was the discipline itself. Assad, in his Anthropology and the Colonial Encounter, illustrates how anthropologists advised colonial governments on the nature of changes in African colonies. They provided details of local tribal groups and social institutions that paved the way for indirect rule in these colonies. Similarly, Cooper elaborates how, although often suspected for their familiarity with natives, anthropologists kept apprising the colonial government of the rise and threat of the progressive, educated, nationalist Africans, and other issues such as acculturation, domestic social problems, poverty, and war effects. Anthropologists were appropriately rewarded through individual research grants and institutional administrative support for their work. It was only after the 1950s that anthropological research saw an increase in financial support and could disengage from colonial responsibilities. However, this shift did not necessarily alter the anthropological pre-contact conception of tribes as primitive, backward, and uncivilized, which has justified the civilizing mission in the colonies and continued to inform the intellectual underpinnings of the discipline.
Ritambhara, just to interrupt, are your slides not moving? I mean,
No.
see
I have put all the points of the section in this one.
All right. Okay.
Points so
People
that
are asking, we just have to check.
No.
Sorry.
I'll go to the next. So the question is, how are people whose identities are set within this framework of this sort of contact conception of tribes being primitive, backward, and uncivilized? How are these people's identities, how are people whose identities are set within this framework to find themselves? Furthermore, how can a discipline that continues to debate the existence of a people ever claim to represent them truly? So this is one of the sort of foremost crises that I identified within anthropology in the study of tribes. There is no sort of earnest desire to know this, to know tribes, and there is an ethnocentrism, a very strong sense of ethnocentrism that has, informed the study of tribes since the time of colonialism, and which hasn't changed thereafter. Now I come to the second section called the eliminating the self, and here I will be basically getting into much of the theorization that's happened in India on the question of tribes. Now, this background that I provided just now, in many ways also resonates with the development of the discipline in India too. I will elaborate in this section on eliminating the self. I would first provide a brief background to how the tribal question developed through the course of colonialism and became a cause of concern in post-independent India. So again, a little background on what happened in India. Slightly different from the Western sort of history of anthropology, but somewhere I think that all of it sort of comes together at the end of it when who are tribes, this question is raised in the context of India. I think there is tremendous affinity between a Western sort of construction of tribes and that what you find in India. One of the common questions asked of tribes in India is, when will tribes cease to be tribes? The question, as evident, is a dud. It is a negative articulation about a people whose existence has never been acknowledged, except as a category that would along the way dissolve and merge with the mainstream society. This form of anthropological theorization on tribes, I argue, has proactively engaged in a politics of elimination, denying tribes a place in the political and cultural imagination of the nation. Here I reflect on some of the dominant perspectives on the tribal question in India, which came up on the eve of India's independence to address the problem of what to do with these people, endangering India's political and cultural frontiers. The common thread that ran through much of the different views expressed therein was sophistry and a pedantic call for elimination. In India, anthropology has debated the question on their origin and affinity for the longest time. Are they people, jana, caste, peasant, society, or indigenous? There has been a disagreement among the anthropologists, sociologists on who they are, and almost all express the difficulty in honing in on one acceptable definition. Many tribes in India have historically shared varying levels of contact with and even integrated into the caste society. So the focus was not so much on who tribes are, but on what they have become or are becoming. Have they become like castes in being Sanskritized by the way of the dominant Hindu neighbors, as in the case of the Gametis, the Hinduized branch of the Bhils, and the Rajgons, or are they peasants, evinced in their incorporation into the Hindu fold and sedentarization, who continue to hold on to their little traditions like the rest of the agricultural castes in India, entrenched in their ethnicities. The discussion on tribes came up at critical moments, right at the time of independence, as the future of India was being discussed and its borders were being secured. And then again, after India-China War in the 1960s, to comprehend what was condescendingly termed as tribal disturbances in different parts of India, especially in the Northeast region, and post-90s for the protracted armed conflict in many parts of tribal areas. Now, the focus on tribes on all these occasions was not concerned about them, but the anomaly epitomized in their way of life and the relationship with the mainstream society and state. By the time the British left, tribes were an entity to contend with. Many tribal areas did not identify with independent India and were unwilling to be a part of it. The Nagas' first written representation to the Simon Commission in 1929, the Gonds and Bhils demanded statehood in the 1940s, the proposal for separate statehood submitted in the States Reorganization Committee in the 1960s by the Gonds, and the demand for a separate nation, Kolhan, or the land of the Kol or the Ho, expressed the anxiety of tribes over being integrated into independent India. These developments evinced the strong presence of tribal identity in political consciousness. Most of these demands came up during British rule and have been pursued post-independence, India's independence, hoping their aspirations for autonomy would be accepted with changing circumstances. Even as these assertions for autonomy demonstrated the strong presence of tribal identity and political consciousness, they have, contrary to the divisive image such demands have evoked in the public imagination, largely followed the path of negotiation and persuasion, thereby keeping channels of dialogue open, both with the Indian state and within the respective movements. Now, these aspirations for autonomy can be historically traced to the relationship of tribes with the British and thereafter with the Indian state. The protectionist policy of the British was mainly aimed at pacifying the already conscientized tribal communities, evidenced in the series of tribal rebellions that they had to field in the early part of the 20th century. Following these volatile encounters with tribes, the British were guarded and intended on containing the influence of the national movement in tribal areas and restricting access of Indian political leaders into many of these areas, particularly the Northeast. Eventually, India's independence brought the tribal question to the forefront. Large tracts classified as non-regulation states, partially excluded and excluded areas were a matter of concern, not just in terms of what should be the nature of the inclusion into India, but also how best to achieve the same amicably. The future of tribes in independent India then was a nationwide concern, discussed in the parliament and among policymakers and administrators as to who they were and what their future should be. The question was whether they should be assimilated or isolated from the mainstream. The advocates of these two positions were G.S. Ghurye and Verrier Elwin, respectively. Now, the debate has haunted tribes ever since, and I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with it. And it has distorted their entire struggle into the debate on tribes as the noble savage versus backward Hindus. And I feel that this sort of completely cut the tribal question off from the history that I just narrated and reduced it to this debate between the noble savage and versus the backward Hindu. This reframing of the debate unfolds the story of their elimination and of their ideas of self-identity, culture, and autonomy. Elwin promoted the theory of primitivism, wherein tribes were the noble savages, innocent, one with nature, full of sexual innocence and erotic freedom. He proposed preserving features that had been bastardized by the civilized world. In an article, do we really want to keep them in a zoo? He asks, is man better in a state of nature or of art? He argued that the tutored savage was happier and more moral than the sophisticated urban product. His theorization was criticized for romanticizing and essentializing tribes, depicting them as static and as people without history. However, his theory later gained currency for its appreciation of the tribal ecological sensibility. I return to this rendition of the debate later in the presentation. As for Ghurye, he was clearly in favor of assimilating tribes into the mainstream or the large mass of uneducated lower caste Hindus, as they were no different and as much in need of social reforms and upliftment. Nehru's speech in a seminar held in 1952 encapsulates the position of even the most earnest sympathizer of tribes when he set aside the problem of integrating tribes of the Northeast into India as a psychological one, which could be overcome through sensitive administration. There was, in a sense, a denial of the political nature of the problem and concomitantly its gravity. In other words, the underlying message was apparent of opening up the economy and trying as much as possible not to disturb the cultural and social life of people. In all this, it was clear they were different. They were the frontier people, pushing the borders of our imagination and disturbing the vision of a strong, industrialized, and prosperous nation. The key concern was primarily how best to integrate tribes into the mainstream. Now, in a seminar held in 1969 on the tribal question in India, published later in an edited book by K.S. Singh, Ray argued that tribes were not tribes, but janas, literally translates as people. Like other people from Andhra Pradesh, Punjab, and Tamil Nadu, the only thing that differentiated them from the latter was jati. However, jati was not to be confused with caste, a socio-religious system with a pan-India reference. Jati was a hierarchical and hereditary local arrangement of socio-economic groups that had historically been drawn, tribes into its fold. According to this framework, tribes could not withstand the superior might of the invading Aryans, who over time settled in the plains and developed an organized social, economic, and political system of their own. This system gradually absorbed many of the indigenous, the autochthones, primarily pre-Aryan people, referred by Ray as Jana in its fold. N.K. Bose termed this process the Hindu method of tribal absorption. In his discussion of the tribes of Chota Nagpur in central India, he traces this relationship between village communities and non-Aryan tribes to argue that the changes among the latter was rather slow before colonialism. However, this process gained momentum with the introduction of zamindars, tikadars, and other service castes such as oil pressers, cattle herders, and so on. Even as they resented the zamindars for their growing influence in the region, tribes accepted other caste groups in the villages. So I'm quoting him, in surrendering themselves to the protective arrangements of Brahminical society, they tacitly accepted the caste system and the Varna creed. He also mentions the influence of Brahmin culture on the Mundas, illustrated, for example, in the exchange of vermilion by the bride and groom during marriages, and prescriptions of fasting and bathing during religious ceremonies. S.C. Roy concurred with this view, again, a stalwart as far as the study of tribes, especially in central India, is concerned. He concurred with this view about the influence of superior cultures. He was convinced that the ideals of jnana, bhakti, karma, true knowledge, devotion, and action, the font of both Hinduism and Christianity, and he was basically talking about the puritanical aspect of Hinduism and Christianity, would guide tribal religions of Chota Nagpur towards more Indian lines. Now, for both Ray and Bose, the old process has now been accelerated through changes initiated by the money economy and the compulsion of the modern Indian state. They realized the old method of tribal absorption was not viable, not so much for its duplicity, but primarily for its gradualness and slow pace. Ray demonstrated impatience when he stated, are we to follow the traditional old process of slow, patient, gradual integration? Time is pressing. Do we have time enough to pursue such a process? Contrarily, can we telescope the process so as to be able to bring out a quick change in the situation? So should such telescoping be judicious? Can one eliminate time altogether, relatively speaking? Now, Ray's urgency to speed up time to the point of eliminating it altogether to draw tribal communities into the new economic system, quote unquote, committed to progressive industrialization, was matched by Bose's philosophy of ekama vidvitiyam, of moving forward towards the unity of mankind, unbroken by space and time. Okay, so tribes in these expositions were the Janas and peasants, people no different from large mass of low-caste Hindus. So the question of integration and assimilation is a non-starter, a cul-de-sac. The call for integration and assimilation has been a mandate for elimination, purging the temporal and spatial distance between tribes and the rest of the population. Integration, the first step towards elimination, would expose tribes to the modern industrial economy, and subsequently assimilation would homogenize tribal way of life and culture with the mainstream. Assimilation was the final step towards the transition into the mainstream. It was never integration versus assimilation. It was a continuum, never either or. It was a systematic effort to wrest all speculations about tribes and their future. It was elimination all along. It was the elimination of the worst kind, attested by the biggest travesty faced by tribes in the name of integration and assimilation. So look at the irony that the definitiveness of tribes, as Bethe states, comes not from the anthropological exposition, but from constitutional safeguards and provisions, which are also open to prevailing political arrangements and dynamics. Now, B.N. Lokur, the chairman of the committee set up by the Government of India in 1965 to advise and revise the existing list of scheduled tribes and caste, presented a similar argument. Various committees set up by the Government of India pointed to the lack of a universal definition of tribes. The problem arose not just due to the vested interest built into the system that has disallowed a reconsideration of the list, but also because of the main criteria for identifying tribes is still their low level of contact with mainstream society. The administrative definition holds on to a pre-contact essentialist conception of tribes, and at the most to the idea of tribes in transition. And by I mean pre-contact essentialist conception is basically tribes as the uncivilized, primitive, backward. Within this framework, the growing assertion of tribal identity is not seen as an expression of re-tribalization. It is viewed as a function of politics that takes tribes further away from what can be reasonably described as tribes. And I'm quoting Bethe here. The question of who are tribes is still at large, with anthropology offering no possible direction other than the one offered by the Indian Constitution. So at the end of the entire exposition of who tribes are within Indian anthropology, what we are left with is only the constitutional sort of definition, and it sort of reflects on the sort of poverty of the theorization that exists in India on the question of tribes. Now I come to the next section on the elimination of agency. Now, this section focuses on the theorization of the tribal movements within anthropology sociology to argue that it is only carried forward the politics of elimination. Here, the agency of tribes is eliminated. Their theorization was warped, but here the agency, and I feel that tribal movements serve as a site to understand the dynamic nature of Adivasi or tribal society, and also sort of present very sort of fascinating critiques to how we look upon the world. But none of that actually sort of makes its way into the classification of tribes, the tribal movements. Now, Raghavaiah records 70 tribal movements from 1778 to 1971. Anthropological Society of India identified 46 tribal movements during 1976-77 within a year. They have been categorized variously as movements for political autonomy, agrarian forest-based movements, Sanskritization processes, and cultural movements based on scripts and languages. Now, the initial sense one gets by analyzing dominant approaches in the study of tribal movements is that it is an assimilationist account of political, economic, and social change among tribes. The classification of tribal movements highlights the ubiquity of land alienation, indebtedness, landlessness, bonded labor, loss of forests and livelihood among tribes that led to land and forest-based struggles, social and political movements, and concomitant articulation of tribal identity, but do not provide an overarching perspective on how movements, however diverse, challenge the anthropological definition of tribes. So there's been no sort of an, reflexivity to sort of come back to the question of how then are we looking at the question of who tribes are. Now, tribes, as per the classification, are still on the path of integration and assimilation. They are becoming more Sanskritized, assimilating into the mainstream through reformation and revitalization, joining the ranks of peasants and engaging in class struggle. And in expressing political autonomy are either already mainstream or seditious. Now, the classification has not led to an introspection within the discipline on the nature of social disintegration brought out by the transformative processes introduced through colonialism and post-independence India in reframing the tribal question. Now, the overwhelming participation of tribes in peasant, agrarian, and forest-based movements through colonial rule and post-independent India shifted the academic focus to the class character of this struggle and consciousness as a people. Now, here the reference is specifically to the left perspective in India on tribes, tribal identity-based and environmental movements. In this perspective, tribal identity and politics were shaped by these historical and political encounters and cannot be attributed to a pre-contact conception of tribes. The emphasis is on the historical approach over the evolutionary approach of tribes, that is, dismissing the idea that tribes are remnants of an earlier stage of human evolution in favor of an approach that stresses the coexistence of different social formations at a given point in time. However, despite recognizing tribes as contemporaries and taking the discussion away from the civilizational lag associated with tribes so far, this framework shifts the focus on the tribal interface with the state and the market to illustrate the beginnings of class consciousness among them. Now, the emergence of inequalities among tribes and experiences of exploitation mark the transition from a pre-class category toward a class society seeking redressal for their marginalization. Tribes in this formulation emerge as historical and political subjects in their struggle against the land, forest expropriation, and capitalism. Here, tribal consciousness is considered inseparable from class consciousness and awareness of their systemic marginalization and exploitation. The recourse to identity-based mobilization and cultural assertion among tribes is attributed to their marginalization by the mainstream and the state, and mobilization to offset the violation of their right to just about survive. The tribal question of how to integrate tribes into the mainstream society is metamorphosed into a class question, wherein the focus is on their subordination through history and not on the identitarian territorial claims of tribes to assert their indigeneity. Now, Stuart is somebody who's done a lot of work on tribes in Kerala, specifically in Wayanad district. Now, she states, being a tribe in Wayanad does not have much to do with the traditional customs and practices, but has much to do with the extent of their marginalization on social, economic, and political domain. Stuart further states, describing how and to what effect people become known as tribal is precisely intended to demonstrate the nonsense of debating whether these people are genuinely tribal, as well as to emphasize that the essential difference that the notion signals is a governmental, and I have quoted it like that, in the PPT, governmental construct and not a useful tool to study historical relations. Tribality is a category born of Western fantasy and colonial imperatives backed by certain currents of anthropology willing to lend it substantive analytical value. And I suppose I'm one of them. The context of Stuart's rather scathing reference to the category tribe as a notion is a concern of the rise of indigenism and the articulation of Adivasiness or tribalness, indigeneity, specifically in Kerala. Indigeneity is still an unsettled issue in India on most of the parameters associated with indigenous people on international platforms. Now, for instance, the indigenous claim of being first settlers, literally translates as Adivasis, has been contested in India by many, as many tribes are later migrants in their area of residence, like Nagas for one. Even the Ho, the people who actually demanded a separate Kolhan, they were later residents. Now, this idea of firstness is mistaken for first settlers or the event of who came first. However, it refers to the structural displacement brought about by settler colonization, which concomitantly destroyed the tribal social and economic organization and their sense of self-identity and culture. Also, among the many issues raised over the indigenous status of tribes in India, the main concern is that despite sharing the historical experience of marginalization, they're racially and culturally diverse, making it difficult to represent them in essentialist terms. Differentiation and disparity among tribes, political, social, and economic, have made anthropologists and social activists cautious in supporting indigeneity claims in India. This form of reasoning is what Wolf terms the strategy of repressive authenticity, which cancels out features considered inauthentic about tribes. Here, tribes are put through the same form of selective review employed to ascertain the tribal status to establish their indigeneity. Ironically, the idea of the pre-contact essence of tribes continues to take precedence over the diverging post-contact through history and extant articulation of self and identity. Subalternity is privileged over heterogeneity of tribes, forsaking the question of indigeneity to delineate the contours of indigenous politics. Indigeneity, so what I'm arguing is, indigeneity is not acceptable, indigenous politics is, right? And subalternity is preferred over, heterogeneity of tribes. So this again sort of, traps tribes again in that, politics of the pre-contact conception and of elimination. And there's this very, clear sort of denial of coevalence. Tribal autonomy and environmental movements have also come under scrutiny for ignoring processes of dispossession due to pre-colonial feudal structures and expropriating practices of the post-colonial state and capitalist forces, and playing up what is arguably a eulogized pre-contact essentialist conception of communitarian life among tribes with close affinity to the natural world. So one of the critiques of the left of the environmental movement, tribal movement, has been this, that there is a sort of a romanticization of tribes, saying that, they're shown as people who are communitarian and, homogeneous and live in harmony with nature. And the history of, feudalism and all of that is ignored. Now, this understanding is considered, this understanding of, the environmental movement and tribal autonomy movement is considered ahistorical and anti-modern, fundamentally of how colonialism is represented as the ecological watershed in Indian history, giving an impression that tribes coexisted with caste society in a cooperative alliance of interests. Now here, I'm basically referring to Archana Prasad's work, where she's very critical of Ramchandra Guha, and the argument that he makes in his book, The Fisher Land, where, caste, that has been the argument that caste is shown in a very benign light, as if all problems started only with colonialism and that caste society did not have an oppressive relationship with tribal society, with tribes. Now, this argument has become stronger with time to warn against the spread of Hindu right-wing presence in tribal areas. However, what of this threat? I mean, here I'm not trying to negate the spread of the right wing, but in the context of the argument made by the left and other sort of social activists, so my question is, what of this threat? since tribes are but a notion. Who is being threatened? A governmental construct? More importantly, what is being rescued or saved? If tribes is just a notion, what is being rescued and saved? Who are tribes? And what is being effaced? Do they have a distinct place in the nation's imagination besides jana, caste, and class? The answer to these questions remain elusive and smack of paternalism. These questions become pertinent, especially when identity-based movements and claim of indigeneity are perceived as a strategy and not intrinsic to the search of tribal self in the face of economic and cultural effacement. Apparently, tribal movements are not an expression to go back to a golden age that never existed. While this may be the case, as the golden age is as garbled as primitivity, this understanding is misplaced. To draw on Patrick Wolf again, this dismissal of the supposed golden age in favor of a narrative of the exploited class performs the same disguised ideological function of limiting and containing otherness within the acceptable terms of dominant discourses, be it that of the so-called romantics or the assimilationists. So on certain counts, tribes and tribal, resistance is acceptable. On certain other counts, the articulation of tribal identity and sense of self is not acceptable. Cultural expressions are seldom about a lost world. They are not about the past, but located in post-contact encounter between heterogeneous times, past and present. The post-contact encounter is not a stage in a linear progression of time from, tribe, caste, class, or, just in terms of tribe becoming caste or getting integrated with the modern state. Rather, it is a site of critically diverse and disparate engagements with multiple articulation of the self and the other, of the remembered and inherited past. They define the contours of what it means to be in the present. It is about how to be, what matters and what does not. While these renderings may not coincide between and within tribes, they disrupt the homogenizing hold of the linear progression of time, forced on tribes over centuries through ideas of civilization, progress, and development. So now I just come to the conclusion of the saga of elimination that I've illustrated so far as the definition of tribes is concerned, and also in terms of their agency. So in this elaborate discussion on tribes, what has eluded any definition is the idea of the mainstream. So there's been a lot of theorization of tribes, but nobody's really focused on what constitutes the mainstream. Is it caste, jana, So what constitutes the mainstream for tribes, other than the apparent destination in their journey to civilization, modernity, and development? Is it caste, the new economic order, class, or the acquired identities of scheduled tribes, Adivasi, or indigenous? It remains an unhinged concept, retaining only one common feature over time: its purpose to serve as a site for eliminating tribes. It is the antithesis of tribes. The mainstream is what tribes are not, and that which tribes must move towards, leaving behind who they are. You may ask me, then then are tribes what they leave behind? And what is that tribes leave behind, right? So, however, has not what they leave behind been further mainstreamed as pre-contact essence, as illustrated in all the sort of theorization that I just sort of discussed? So, however, has not what they leave behind been further mainstream as pre-contact essence, an unchanging mythic identity that raises its head from time to time to insulate tribes from humanity? Or sublabeled and categorized as Adivasi and indigenous, only to be tested for their deservedness to claim these insignias? As a process, mainstreaming seeks the movement towards homogeneity and standardization. It is a stance, a politics, posturing of an otherwise diverse people, culturally and politically heterogeneous, characterized by multiplicities of identities, modernities, and vocabularies of dissent. How then are tribes to emerge out of this politics of elimination? Will engaging critically with the process of mainstreaming rescue tribes from this dead end? Anthropology has a task cut out in redressing this theoretical and political abyss that it should no longer ignore. So again, this is a work in progress. I'm still sort of developing this whole sort of understanding of the mainstream, but I do definitely advocate that we move away from this question of, who tribes are initially, to really look at what is the mainstream and how does one sort of address, this entire sort of politics of elimination by looking at the politics of the mainstream group. Thank you.
Vijayani, we can't hear you. Sorry, ma'am. Thank you so very much, ma'am, for such an insightful and elaborate talk. And in 3 of your sections, elimination of self, elimination of agency, and the mainstream saga, in 3 of your main sections, you have carefully trying to pose different anthropological concerns. So now I'll open the floor for the interactive session. So those who have any questions, queries, observations, and comment, they can type it in the chat box. And those who want to ask any questions, they also can raise their hands. Ma'am, there's a question for you from Sanjana Sinha. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ma'am, you want me to read that out for you?
I'm trying to read it here. Okay, so the question is basically, how can the non-Adivasi masses be more aware and considerate of the concerns of Adivasis getting their rights over Jal, Jungle, Zameen? Well, that's, my paper is all about that, to say that, to sort of recognize and identify this politics of elimination and this sort of selective engagement with Adivasi movements and tribal movements on the way they raise issues related to Jal, Jungle, Zameen. So there is tremendous fragmentation within sort of the movement or within the sort of entire gambit of organizations and activists and scholars who are championing the cause of Adivasis. And there are tremendous differences and on basically what is a rightful claim and not a rightful claim. And one needs to address this. And I think that can only happen if Adivasi voices are made more sort of visible. One of the ways I don't know whether I should bring this up here, but when President Draupadi Murmu's candidature came up, I think that sort of debate that came out at that time reflected this, that there were people who felt that she did not authentically represent tribal interests. So we are still caught up with this very colonial idea of who tribes are and, all of that. And I think we need to move ahead and sort of engage more sort of proactively with the movements that are taking place at the grassroots level, to be able to present a more sympathetic and sort of a more substantive understanding of what is happening at the ground level, at the grassroots level, when it comes to the issue of Jal, Jungle. I don't know whether I answered that question, but.
Ujjwala, please ask your question.
Experiences, okay. While performing ethnographic research in the struggles of
could you share your experiences apart from we've also been reading on ethnographic research in our paper.
Okay.
So I'd like to know what are the on-field experiences you faced when you were doing your research. And also I know that you've been associating with the Ho village group on forest restoration. What is it to doing on-field research apart from reading about it on books for us?
Okay. Well, when I first went to do my research, I'm putting in very layperson's term. I'm just sort of recollecting. It's been a long while. I did my research in the late 1990s, early 2000s at that time. And of course, my first sort of realization when I reached there was that they're a highly diverse and heterogeneous society. And, you would find Ho being a part of every aspect of life there. They were bureaucrats, they were bankers, they were, of course, activists, and they were forest dwellers. So there was tremendous heterogeneity among the Ho that I found. And that sort of, first of all, it challenged my understanding of tribes, what I had sort of learned in anthropology. And I also realized that all of them were articulating their own struggle to come to terms with who they are. So, one of the things that I used to get invited quite regularly by a bankers group of Adivasis who would hold, like, every Saturday or Sunday a meeting to talk about, their history as to who the Ho are and how they migrated into the region, to discuss the complexity of their language, to understand the significance of it in understanding the present crisis, especially in the context of forest conservation that was going on at that point in time, because that was the time when they were just recovering from this Jungle Kato Andolan that had taken place in that region, where all the forest department was, had to flee because of, Adivasis, largely the Ho, taking over the forest and starting their own Jungle Bachao Andolan. And they started managing the forests on their own. So the village I went to also did not have any presence of the forest department whatsoever. And, it was managed by, different three groups, three Vanraksha Samitis. And all three of them didn't see eye to eye. One was working very closely with the Tata rural sort of society there, this corporate social responsibility of the Tatas, and were in favor of sort of commercializing, forestry to some extent. And there was this other group, these two other groups, which were quite against that idea and had different conception of how forests should be conserved. So what it definitely told me was that the question of who they are and how they see their future, how they want to restore their Jal, Jungle, Zameen, all of those questions were contested ones. There was no, the clarity was not there, and they were debating among themselves. What was happening was that the movement was not really picking up these sort of things that were happening at the ground level. The Jharkhand movement was sort of absent in the area that I did my research. And very few activists actually went down to the villages to talk to them. The villages had a good grip of what they were doing. They were managing their forests all right, but in terms of how should be managed, their differences. But they were resolving it on their own. And for me, I think these are things that anthropology really never captures. And there's a very polarized understanding of, the Jal Jangal Zameen issue also, in the way it's presented in popular writing. So, I don't know whether I've answered your question again, but just in terms of the experience of having done ethnography, it was wonderful. It was humbling. And it told me a lot about myself, the limitations of who I am. And I also came to know what unconditional love was, because I think I was accepted with great love among the people whom I did my research. I used to call the people, the couple who sort of hosted me in their house, I used to call him Ma and Baba. And again, a sort of a light anecdote. When I left the village finally, and I was at the district headquarters, I happened to meet their daughter who had come to the district headquarters. And so she said that Ma hasn't slept for the last 3 days. And she keeps remembering you. And I'm a vegetarian. I started taking egg when I was there. So she had sent 100 rupees to me, and I was saying that I should buy sweets for myself and have. And I thought that kind of a gesture, I think, just left me speechless, because that was the kind of love that I got. And ethnography, I think, is a way to sort of transcend the limited sort of world we live in, and to understand that there are people on the other side, or the other cultures that we say, when you familiarize yourself with them, you realize there is humanity everywhere. I think that's the message of anthropology. That is what I think ethnography helps you gain, this deep sense of reverence for life, for other cultures, for diversity, and also the sort of dignity to accept difference. I think so they accepted me as I was. I was a vegetarian, eggetarian then. They accepted me as I was. I didn't have to, they didn't force me to do anything. Whatever little I did it on my own. And they observed me as much as I observed them. So I think I lived there. I don't even say I did ethnography there. I lived there for a good 2 years. And
sorry to interrupt, Ritambhara, but I think there are a lot of questions and we have a speaker waiting. But Vijayani, I think Professor Sabyasachi is waiting, and I think we'll take that and we'll finish.
Yes, his praise, ma'am. Sabyasachi sir, please.
Many things to say on this paper for students to understand what Ritambhara is trying to actually say. I'll begin with the last question that she was asked on what field experiences tell you. So when I started to do my fieldwork, I was told that the people I'm going to work with are the most backward primitive tribes in this country. So a category given to me. I was told that they have no culture. I was told that they are part of the scheduled tribes and caste list. And when I went there, I discovered to my surprise that they called themselves Koitors. And nowhere in the literature, nowhere in the administration, nowhere in the people who interacted with them knew that they were Koitors. So then on another occasion, a group of friends from the village went to the government office, and the officer then said, who is a tribe, you come in this side. Who is not a tribe, you come this side. Who's advanced, you come that side. Who's primitive, who come this side. So a group of 10 people were divided into 4 groups. And suddenly we saw that the collective that they had as Koitors was now divided into 4 different groups, and they were entitled to 4 different kinds of privileges. And when they got their privileges because of state schemes, and they came back to the village, in 1 year's time, they started to fight with each other. And the respect that they have for each other was completely lost, because one was getting one kind of privilege, the other was not getting that privilege. And because of the differences that were created by these privileges that were given to them, according to categories, the entire collective life of the people was destroyed. The deeper question really is that nowhere in the colonial framework and nowhere in the framework that we follow India do we actually want to know who people are by their name. You see, they also have a name. And that name is not a category name. So people I worked with in Abujamar, they call Abujamar Singar Bhoom. They don't call Abujamar. They call themselves Koitors. Then I worked in Orissa. These people call themselves Kui people, but the government calls them as human sacrifice, Kutia Khond people. And you can't make sense of the 2 categories working together. So this is a question about self. The self is lost in the categories that we use to classify people. The second issue is that we have often considered mainstream to be something that is taken for granted, right? As if there is no other stream that is as important or as significant as that which we construct to be mainstream. Now, a way to understand this problem is that look at the number of rivers that we have in this country. Right? Each river has its own ecology. Each river is a mainstream for that geography. And suddenly we don't know what is that mainstream in the Indian subcontinent, which we will define as only that one river that defines every other river. That doesn't happen like this. So the mainstream is a construct which is important for some purposes, which I'm not really going to discuss. But the mainstream has to be demythologized. It has to be demystified as that one stream which is inclusive of everyone. The mainstream, by definition, requires you to not be what you are first and then become what the mainstream expects you to be. So first you have to let go of who you are, and that is the elimination of the self. And when you let go of who you are, you are not allowed to think of yourself as a koitor. You are allowed to think of yourself as an utterly primitive group of people living in this country. Now, can you imagine the person who thinks he's a koitor and now he has to retrain himself to think himself as the most backward person in this country? So how does he learn to do that? When he goes to school, he is told not to speak his mother tongue in the school. Even if the government policy says that you must teach in the mother tongue, in class, he says you stop speaking your mother tongue. Right? And this boy, when he goes back home, he tells his grandfather, who are you? You are sitting with a langoti here. You are a backward person. Right? I can't live like this. And I have seen these cases. I have seen many cases over 10 years of my fieldwork in 4 different states in this country. Now, this is not only the case with people. You talk to senior bureaucrats, right? And you ask them, what do they think of the tribal people? Oh, they're very beautiful people, a very Elvin style of conversation. They're very beautiful people, they're very likely, and etc., etc. But we can't leave them the way they are. I said, what do you mean by you can't leave them the way they are? No, how can you deprive them of so many benefits of modern civilization? So we started to count what are the benefits of modern civilization that tribal people get. And we realized that a large population of tribal people have not got the benefits of modern civilization. And those who have actually forgotten everything that they were, say, 10 generations ago. Now, the question is now that we don't go back 10 generations. The question is that what does a tribal mean? What does a forest dweller mean? In India, we can say that all tribals today were originally forest dwellers. So what can they contribute to mainstream society? And here is what they can contribute, which we should consider very seriously. Most of the medicinal plants that we use today have been verified to be true, but modern science does not accept them as knowledgeable people. Modern science does not want to find out how did they know the medicinal properties of plants without physics, chemistry, biology, and mathematics. I think that is a contribution that they can make to our society and many more things, which I think there should be a second occasion to discuss this. Thank you very much for this short discourse on what I thought Ritambhara was trying to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Although our next, our chief guest for the valedictory session is already here, but we will just take up one question by Professor Balram Singh. He's joined us from USA today. Sir, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, I have unmuted myself. Thank you so much. Appreciate that and really enjoyed the conversation of the Ritambhara ji and also Sachi ji. I think I want to just take maybe the thread from physics, chemistry, biology. I mean, I am a biophysical chemist. I really feel that science is more anthropogenic than scientific because science itself has a perspective. And even so, even if we look at science, it has a perspective either of mostly of human beings. We as human beings put ourselves at the highest level of evolution when that is not true. It's not technically true, it's not physically true, it's not biologically true. So the idea that I was asking, I think I wrote that, can we look at even if you want to use anthropogenic as a word, can we look at the reverse? can we look at ourselves from the tribal, so-called tribal? I call them to be more like naturalist, the naturalist point of view. Then we find that what a mess we have created, and then that can be evaluated whether who is more knowledgeable. Just one point I want to make is that as a part of evolution, you got to live in nature to evolve. If you do not live in nature, there is no way you are going to evolve. So we have barricaded ourselves in our so-called facilities and the comfortable living and technology, which is keeping us from evolving. And whereas at least the people who live in the forest or in the nature, that includes animals, they seem to be more evolved, and they should have been more evolved, and they do live much better, and they live more sustainable. So from sustainable point of view, I think we need to look at the reverse, where we look. It looks like I have a daughter who, when she was 5-year-old and she was putting on a dress, when I asked her, "Oh, that's nice dress, can I have it?" She said, "When you grow up, you will fit in it." So many times we are trying to make these people to grow up, to fit in our little world. And I think that's very important to look at. So I'd like to have that comment. And if Ritambhara ji has some comment on it, I will be happy to listen to. Thank you.
No, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with your comment. It's just that in the context of anthropology, the argument that I was making was probably the same argument that you are, but in a different language, I suppose, given my disciplinary background, was that anthropology has lost its focus, and for what Sachi also said, that there is always this, tribal areas have been reduced to war zones, and wars of discourses, and, and it's a zone of politics and discursive sort of war is being fought, other than the physical war that goes on. And I think there is a need to sort of slow down and to revisit this sort of discursive field we've created, to really get back to actually doing some decent ethnography, to accept the pace at which Adivasis, tribals live, understand it, get a sense of their critique of how they see the world, of what this, make of what is happening around them. And like Sachi said, they have a very strong understanding of the natural world. Even those who've moved away, there has been a movement among them to even sort of retrieve, through remembering and the memory of what life was like for them. And I think anthropology has a responsibility to sort of represent that, and which I think along the way we have forgotten. So that this is a crisis. I'm not saying it's new. It's been there for a while. Even when I did my MPhil, I remember I had gone to Sachi. He had just, I think for us, he was this mythic character actually, because he had done his work on Bastar and been there in the jungle and whatever. So I remember meeting him during my MPhil and saying, who are tribes, Sachi? I've gone through 200 books. I don't know what to make of it. Who are tribes? And the only thing that I could see was all negative. There was nothing redeeming that was told about tribes. And how can that be? For centuries, there's nothing redeeming that's told about these people. And that's precisely because as anthropologists, as ethnographers, we don't have the patience. We don't want to give time and to that process of knowing. And it's only when we do that, probably what you're saying in terms of a naturalist point of view can emerge, which also Sachi talked about. There is a need to actually, have the humility to engage with that and recognize that there's something wrong with us, that we've not got it right. So this is exactly what I'm saying, Professor Singh. Nothing different from what you've said, actually. Sachi, if you want to add.
Nothing much. There are lots to say, but I think there is shortage of time. So I will just make one comment that people must not take the mainstream to be the final word on what things are. Mainstream is problematic. I will leave that question for all students to think, and we can have a separate discussion on this. Thank you very much.
I would only say that scholars need to decolonize themselves, because we are too much in the colonized mindset, and we still use their perspective as if that is the only perspective to be looked at, and that indigenizing is an important aspect. I think if anybody can do, India probably can do much better than any other society.
Sincere apologies due to paucity of time. I won't be able to, take the other questions. Ma'am, I once again thank you for joining us today. We sincerely wish that we have more sustained collaborations with you in the future as well. Now I shall hand over the session to Brotati ma'am.
Thank you so much, Vijayani. And after this very stimulating and very enriching session, as we sit here today discussing the expanding frontiers of knowledge with our eyes on the future, we must take a moment to honor the past. While India celebrates the 75 years of independence this year, the horrors of Partition Day reminds us that the freedom we enjoy today has come at a great human cost. In remembering lost lives and homes, it urges us to have compassion, kindness, and gratitude as we move forward to an India with new intellectual horizons.
बोल रही है
For those who are asking, this is a slideshow. There is no sound in this.
Thank you so much for giving your time and going through the journey of that our people went through during partition. It was just a remembrance of that. Now let us, all of us, stand for the national anthem.
पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उज्जल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you, Neeraj. Now I hand over the stage to Dr. Parul. Parul, you please take over the session and move ahead.
Thank you. Please be seated. A very good morning to all our eminent guests, speakers, respected principal, enthusiastic participant, fellow colleagues, and dear students. I, Dr. Parul, Department of Physics, warmly welcome you all in the valedictory session of International Conference Equinox 2022 on theme The Expanding Frontiers of Knowledge. We are delighted to have with us our esteemed guest, Honorable Professor Prabhat Ranjan, Vice Chancellor, D.Y. Patil International University, Akurdi, Pune. We welcome Sir, who has taken time out from his busy schedule to be here with us today. This year, our international conference, Equinox, was conducted over the course of 3 days and saw galaxy of distinguished speakers from various disciplines across the globe delivering talks on a plethora of themes. Each session was intellectually stimulating and engaging. We also had 8 platform sessions on a diverse set of topics on the cutting edge of research. This was an opportunity to develop critical thinking, a sense of scientific inquiry, and research perspective among students and teachers, and to apply theoretical knowledge to solve real-life issues. Now, I invite our respected and much-loved principal of Maitrey College, Professor Ritambhara Chopra, to address the gathering. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Prabhat.
I hope I am audible and I'm
Yes, ma'am,
visible
you
on.
are audible. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. At the outset, I extend a very warm welcome to the galaxy of esteemed guests that are there with us. Professor Prabhat Ranjan, who has consented to be the chief guest of this valedictory session, on members of the editorial and advisory board of our journal, Vantage, Journal of Thematic Analysis, under the aegis of which this international conference has been organized. So on the behalf of Methray College, I extend a very warm welcome to you all. And I thank you all for accepting our invite and being a part of this. And I also take this opportunity to welcome all our delegates who have joined from different corners of the world, and all the members of the organizing committee who are there and who all have been working for the past so many days to make this conference a reality and a big success. And I was going through the messages that were being posted in the chat box just 2 to 5 minutes before, wherein everybody was just wondering that why is this slideshow being going on? And as we all know that it's a moment of pride for Indians that we are celebrating the 75th year of independence. In fact, it is culminating, and from 15th of August, we'll be stepping into the 76th year. And so many celebrations are going around not only in India, but even in different corners of the world, because India being the largest democracy, everybody is keeping an eye that how we would be celebrating this event. And the people who are part of Delhi University, they are already aware, but for others who have joined from other universities, I would wish to share with you all that it is indeed a very important year for the upcoming year is very important for the students or the alumni of Delhi University, because our alma mater has completed a century of its existence. So Delhi University has a glorious past of 100 years now. And when then so many things are happening at the same time, so it becomes very pertinent to understand that what would be our vision for tomorrow and how we have obtained what has happened over the past. So this is the time. And when we think of any academic institution, when we have to celebrate, the celebration is always in terms of organizing a program, organizing an event where we can have constructive deliberations, where we are able to engage eminent people across the globe at one platform, and we come up with something different. Maybe the things, because whatever is being discussed here, it will become a history, and so many things would be added to the global pool of knowledge. And when these things are happening, it is very important for us to understand what happened and how did we arrive at this present day. And when we look at this particular exhibition, this was the virtual exhibition which has been made by the UGC, University Grant Commission. And this particular, because if you look at it, it comprises of so many pictures, pictorials are there, some newspaper clippings are there. So it is simply a reflection that how this information has been stored. This information is there with us, but we have never used, we never realized. And maybe we always talk about what are our rights, what should be our responsibilities. Many times we don't even think of those things. So we thought that at this valedictory session, when this is being attended by our students also, it is our responsibility to make our youth understand that the freedom that we have with us at this stage is because of the sufferings beyond. This is the foundation of which is being laid on the sufferings of so many people. And those people are no one but our grandfathers, great grandfathers, mothers. So we should acknowledge them. And I was listening to the deliberations which were going on in the previous session. And I was thinking that maybe this is the very apt thing that has happened. And this is very much in in sync with the theme of this conference also. So I was saying that when we thought of celebrating these glorious moments, we thought that we should have some conference, and this equinox, that is why it was organized towards the completion of 75 years. And we select, that is why it was the main reason for choosing these 3 dates, 11th, 12th, and 13th of August. And though it was a festival time, on 11th it was Raksha Bandhan, but still everyone was involved, because we thought that this is our best tribute to the this is the best tribute of any academician, and this is what we have done. And when we talk about, because during these 3 days the deliberations that were on, we talked about every aspect was taken into consideration, whether it was public health, whether it was understanding nature, it was understanding that how we can, what is happening around us. But the purpose is that, or when we were talking about the tribes, because they themselves, they are, because they have been able to survive themselves over such a long period, from generation. I think they are the best examples of what we are, when we talk about sustainability. So maybe there is a lot that we need to learn from them. Many times nowadays, as it was just being discussed, that we have to make them a part of a mainstream. But when we talk about mainstream, maybe it is not a unidirectional, it is bi-directional. We need to learn a lot from them, that what do we mean by sustainability when we talk about agriculture, what is sustainable agriculture. These are the things which we have been talking about very often nowadays, but maybe these are the things which we need to learn from our ancestors, from the way they were practicing it in past and the way even the tribes are practicing today. So we have to be everything, we have to bring them. When we are saying that everyone should be at the same platform, so it does not mean that they have to go, they have to climb up the ladder. Maybe we also have to put a foot down and understand that what are the common things between us. And only then we can have a society which is more sustainable. And in one of the sessions, the major emphasis was when we talk about preserving our nature. It is not that we are doing it for the nature, we are actually doing it for ourselves. It is our existence, our survival, which is under question. So that is why when so many things are there, so we thought that maybe under one umbrella which binds them together is the expanding frontiers of knowledge. And that is why this conference was given this particular theme, and we got large number of abstracts, presentations, and we're very happy to share that through these platforms we are giving the opportunity to the students, not only to the researchers or the faculty members, but even the students at undergraduate level. They are making their presentations. When we are talking about presentations, it does not mean that we want everyone to be a researcher. But when they are talking, when they're presenting their work, indirectly they are working on their soft skills. And this is the requirement wherever they may go. When they have to be part of the society, these are the small things which they need to understand. And moreover, while working on the presentations, they have done so many deliberations, maybe lots of discussions. They were reading the text, they were going through different journal papers, they were reading, they were trying to understand and to get the thing around it. So maybe it has helped in building on their analytical skills, critical thinking. And these are the attributes which are required by every individual. These are not the things which are only expected of a researcher. This is what we want from everyone. And that is why when we are organizing these at undergraduate level and offering an opportunity to the students, I think the teacher, the faculty members, the organizing committee of this particular conference, they have done a mammoth task, I must say, because this is not a small thing. And with 400 registrations, with more than 56 abstracts and so many paper presentations and about 8 sessions, I think it was for 3 years, it was a complete energy capsule, which has given us so much of food for our thought. And accordingly, we will be able to maybe set our guidelines, or maybe we can set our vision for the upcoming 25 years. And this is what it has been very often talked about. And when we had in the inaugural session, which was where the vice chancellor of the university was there with us, Professor Yogesh Singh ji, and he was very appreciative about the sub themes of this conference, because he mentioned in his speech also that I'm so happy that every aspect has been taken well into consideration, and at the same time he said that all these sub themes are themes in themselves. So maybe he was saying that in times to come, I expect that the college would be organizing these conferences on these sub themes as well. So I'm sure that this is not the end, this is just the beginning. And every year we will be coming up with something different, something new, where we would be able to engage the global community, where everybody is there to share, interact, and this information, this knowledge which is being acquired here is transferred to our youth, to our to the youth who are actually, who are the future of this country, of the globe, not only this country but the entire globe. And we will have a life which is more sustainable. And maybe there are so many things that can be talked about, but I think this is the time when I should stop. And I request our other participants, and we all would be very eager to hear from our chief guest, Professor Prabhat Ranjan ji. And I once again extend a very warm welcome to him. And I thank all the members of the editorial board, all the members of the advisory board, and the managing editors, the organizing committee, for organizing this conference and making it a big success. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for capturing the essence of conference so beautifully and sharing the vision for Equinox with all its benefit. Thank you once again. We all know that Professor Prabhat Ranjan sir is invited speaker for this session. We are obliged, sir, that you have accepted our request to be the guest of honor in the valedictory session. Professor Prabhat Ranjan is the founder and vice chancellor of D.Y. Patil International University, Akurdi, Pune. He is a nuclear fusion scientist, a futurist, an educator, an innovator, and a science communicator. He did his college from IIT Kharagpur and obtained his PhD degree from the University of California, Berkeley. His remarkable contribution India's moon mission, wildlife, and agriculture sector. He is particularly known for his innovation in the field of assistive technology that has helped to put smiles on the faces of persons with severe disability. He is among the pioneers in India on using brain-computer interface to help persons in logged in and other condition to communicate. He has been nominated by Bureau of Indian Standards to represent India at International Standard Organization for BCI standardization process. Professor Ranjan has wide administrative experience. He has been executive director at India's technology think tank, TIFAC, Technology Information Forecasting and Assessment Council, and chairperson of National Steering Committee of AICTE Idea Lab scheme. He also created a flexible and futuristic multiracial BTech program in 2019, which has impacted computer science curriculum across the country in last 3 years. Sir has been a recipient of many awards at the national and international level, including National Science Talent Award, IBM Innovation Grant Award, Bihar Gaurav Samman, and most recently, EduStar, India's most impactful Vice Chancellor Award 2021-22. I invite Sir to deliver his talk titled Nuclear Fusion, Dream Source of Energy. This talk would cover basic details of how scientists are trying to realize the dream of nuclear fusion and their status. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I would, let's see. Yeah, can you see my screen, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's visible.
Thank you. As very little running late, I would move a little fast. Thanks to the organizer for inviting me. Many of things that I've referred to in the document is mentioned in detail in my blog. I mentioned the blog site as ranjan.in at the bottom of the slide here. Before I proceed, I would also like to mention that as head of India's technology think tank, I was responsible for preparing a vision document for the country called Technology Vision 2035. Prime Minister wrote the foreword to this document. He launched it in 2016 at Indian Science Congress and asked all ministries and government departments to follow this document. As we are trying to work towards a vision for the next 25 years, it's important to understand this document. I don't have time today to talk about it, but many things that are happening in the country are happening because of what was done in this document. And one of the things that we had talked about in the document was about nuclear fusion. I'm the first PhD from India in nuclear fusion, which I completed in 1986. As was mentioned in my introduction, I was at IIT Kharagpur and also part of Delhi University. In fact, I was master's student at Delhi University before I went to Berkeley, where I was from 1981 to 86, where I did my PhD in nuclear fusion. I came back to India and joined Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics. For 9 years I was there, and then Institute for Plasma Research, Gandhinagar, where about 7 years I spent. And then I moved to Dhirubhai Amman Institute of ICT in Gandhinagar, where I was professor for 11 years. There also I worked on some aspects of nuclear fusion program. And in Delhi, for 5 years that I was there, I was talking about nuclear fusion as part of national policy documents and media as to what changes are happening in nuclear fusion domain and what we should be doing. And today as a researcher, I'm the chief mentor of a project called Project Sunland in my university, which is funded by Silicon Valley. I will briefly mention about this also in the document. Those of you who are monitoring media related to this, there are a lot of news that keeps coming. This is, of course, more than a year old, which said China achieves China's artificial sun sets world record, achieves plasma temperature of 120 million. And also it's mentioned that 160 million for 20 seconds. In fact, 180 million has been achieved already by China. Just to compare that to temperature of the core of the sun, the maximum temperature of the core of the sun is about 15 million, about 1.5 crore degrees centigrade. So about 12 times of that of the temperature of the sun has been already achieved on Earth. Similarly, there are other methods of achieving nuclear fusion. There's a news item where National Ignition Facility in US achieves breakthrough in laser fusion. There's another news here, Commonwealth Fusion System creates viable path to commercial fusion power with the world's strongest magnet. This Commonwealth Fusion Systems has been set up by MIT in US to realize commercially the nuclear fusion. So all this is the background, and those who are monitoring this news, it's happening regularly. Every few days you see a new news coming up. The outline of this talk is that I will briefly describe what is nuclear fusion in case some of you are not aware. I will specifically mention about a particular device called tokamak, and I'll focus on what is happening in nuclear fusion domain in India. What is the international progress in this domain? What are the private efforts going on? And maybe touch about inertial confinement on another way of achieving nuclear fusion, and then conclude. So briefly, if we say that what is the aim of nuclear fusion, what we are trying to do is to capture sun and put it into the box. And as per one of the researchers, he said that the idea is great. The problem is we do not know how to build that box. We are trying to capture sun and bring it to Earth. A very interesting thing is that 1920, about more than 100 years ago, Dr. Meghnad Saha, who set up Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics, he gave an equation called Saha-Anderson equation. Some of you might have studied about this. This is considered to be the start of plasma physics. And when we try to achieve nuclear fusion, actually we try to create plasma, the fourth state of matter, as roughly we call it. And also in the same year, Arthur Eddington said that nuclear fusion is the process through which stars and sun gets its energy. In 1932, nuclear fusion in lab was demonstrated. And then since 1955, work on controlled fusion has been going on. Controlled nuclear fusion means that it should not explode. Like hydrogen bomb also uses nuclear fusion, but it's uncontrolled release of energy. What we have been working is controlled release of nuclear fusion energy. And from the time that we have started working, we have been always telling that it's about 20 years away. The time has changed, the 20 years has remained. But we believe that now that 20 years is coming down, and maybe another 15 years time, we should be able to achieve, if not earlier, the commercial use of nuclear fusion. So just in case those of you are not aware, what is the nuclear fusion? Fusion is the process of light atoms uniting to form heavier atoms, in which process it releases energy. All of you are also aware of nuclear fission process. In that process also energy release, and nuclear fusion also energy release. How is it possible that one case when you break the nuclei, you get energy, in other case when you combine the nuclei, you get energy? So actually iron is the most stable element. So higher atomic weight compared to iron, when you break the nuclei, you get energy, and lower than that, the lighter elements, when you combine the nuclei, you get energy. So inside the sun, as you might be aware, that it's the hydrogen and hydrogen reaction that takes place to produce energy. But when we look at the atomic power stations which use fission, it's the heavier elements like uranium that is used. Now, these nuclei are positively charged, so normally if you try to bring them together, they actually repel each other. You need very, very high energy to actually overcome this repulsive force. And obviously, it's not very easy to do this. So normally what is done inside the sun is the hydrogen-hydrogen reaction, but that reaction rate is much slower and not so useful on the Earth. So we are trying to use, one of the possibilities is taking isotopes of hydrogen like deuterium and tritium, and either using deuterium-deuterium reaction or deuterium-tritium reactions, and those cross-sections are much larger. The deuterium-tritium cross-section is higher and it requires lower temperature, so deuterium and tritium reaction is a candidate for early stage of fusion reactors. But as we progress, we might have other possibilities, which I'll mention later on. But what are the problems that we face in this? One is creating this high temperature of 100 to 200 million degree centigrades, like 10 to 20 crore degrees centigrade. But as I mentioned, that's already been achieved. But of course, you need to keep it for a very long time. We have been able to achieve it for a few tenths of seconds. Second, the tritium is radioactive, although half-life is much smaller compared to many other radioactive waste that comes out of atomic power stations, which have hundreds of thousands of years of half-life. But tritium is also not easily accessible and must be bred from lithium. So these are the problems that we need to solve. And I will mention briefly how these are being done. So the deuterium tritium that we are talking about, when we bring them together at these high temperatures, and they combine together to produce neutrons carrying energy 14.1 MeV, and also they produce helium. Helium is like an ash, and this neutron that comes out, we capture the energy of neutron, and through the lithium blanket, and when neutrons bombard lithium, there is also a reaction that takes place, and tritium is produced. So you consume tritium, and then you produce tritium. So tritium is recycled through this process. And what comes out is basically helium and energy. Just to give a comparison of how does it compare with other sources of energy or the other ways of producing energy. For example, if I take 10,000 tons of coal, and the amount of energy that is produced in that is the same amount of energy I can produce through 800 grams of deuterium and tritium. 10,000 tons of coal, compare that with 800 grams of deuterium and tritium. Now, where do we get deuterium? Deuterium is contained in water, for example, very small percentage of that in water. You must be knowing about heavy waters. And tritium, as I mentioned, must be generated in situ inside the reactor. So we need initial tritium to start the reaction, and then later on it's getting produced inside the system. Just to give you another comparison, if I take one bathtub of water and combine that with lithium in a laptop battery, lithium in the laptop battery with that of the water that is in one bath of water, one can get energy for 50 years which can suffice the power needs for an average family. There's something called Lawson criteria, but I'll leave out the details. This text talks about certain parameters that must be satisfied for useful use of nuclear fusion. And okay, let me skip this. In my blog, I mentioned one of the blog is how I got into nuclear fusion research. Please don't pay attention to my hair there because now I've lost most of it. There's another blog where I talked about my contribution to nuclear fusion technology, and this has many links to other blogs that I've written about how various parts of nuclear fusion have contributed to. If you look at nuclear fusion, there are so many different approaches. If you look into this, there are too many to talk about. But if you look on the right side, there's one which is under the thermal category, where there's a magnetic confinement, and there's an inertial confinement. These are the two main that one would focus on, and I'm going to focus more on magnetic confinement. So if I look at this curve, this slide, there is a gravitational confinement that happens inside the sun and stars. Okay. Where due to huge mass of these sun and stars, that confines the plasma and the related matters into a localized space. The inertial confinement is a method that is used that uses laser, and I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to focus on magnetic confinement technology. Okay. So as we said that to produce nuclear fusion, you need to have 10 to 20 crore degrees centigrade. The question is that what is the utensil, what is the vessel in which you can keep it? Because anything that you keep in would actually simply be destroyed. So what we try to do is to create a magnetic field cage. And magnetic field, as you know, that if there's a charged particle moving, the magnetic field influences motion. And we use that magnetic field to actually confine the plasma into a cage, in the form of a cage. We create a cage, magnetic cage, inside the confine the plasma. There are two general ways that efforts have been made. One is called the linear confinement, which is shown here as magnetic mirror. And there are toroidal devices. For example, one of the main popular version of this toroidal version is called tokamak. And there is another version called accelerator. Personally, when I was doing my PhD work, which I finished about 36 years ago, I had combined magnetic mirrors and accelerators into a triangular shape, three-dimensional triangular shape. But then most of the world has been working in tokamak, and India also we are working in tokamak. So this is actually showing basic magnetic mirror linear device, which creates a magnetic field, which the charged particles follow the magnetic field lines and they get reflected back and forth. But of course, all of them do not get reflected. Some of them also get lost depending on the angle at which they're approaching the ends. Again, I'm not going to technical details of these. These are the toroidal systems where actually the losses that happen to magnetic mirror in the end side, you actually fold the thing back into a torus, and then the charged particles keep rotating inside. Of course, there are losses that happen due to other regions. And so we need to twist the magnetic field lines in a very complex configuration that would not be easy to cover in this session. But you can just have a look at the figures. The left side is the tokamak device that is right now the most popular, and the right side is the accelerator device. Tokamak has made the main progress. The reports that we have seen from China coming in is all based on tokamak device, which is Russian abbreviation for toroidal magnetic chamber. The right side accelerator device. Accelerator actually was very popular at some stage till tokamak came in, but recently there has been progress in accelerators, especially in Germany. This is the cover page on PhD thesis, which combined the accelerators and magnetic mirrors combined together into what I call helically linked mirror arrangement, and I had named the device as Thelma. Again, I'm not going to take any details, but in addition to confining the plasma, we need to heat the plasma. There are two ways that it is done. One is through use of what is called neutral beam injection heating. Other is called radio frequency heating. These are the two main heating techniques that are used. These are supplementary heating to heat up the plasma to very high temperatures. In India, there were two devices built. One is the Aditya tokamak that was built at Institute of Plasma Research, Gandhinagar. Institute of Plasma Research, Gandhinagar is the main nuclear fusion center for the country, and another one, Sahara Institute of Nuclear Physics, SINP Tokamak, that was built in 1987. In 1987, SINP Tokamak was actually built by Toshiba of Japan. It was a small device. You can see this photograph on the left side, upper one. And the bottom left one is the Aditya device, which was a little bigger one. I had the opportunity to work at both of these places. I will describe a little bit about this, but Aditya was a much bigger device compared to the SINP, although it was set up in 1989 and the SINP one was set up in 1987. Right now, not much work is going on at Science Institute of Nuclear Physics. That program is mostly stopped. So the Institute of Plasma Research is the main center where work is going on. And they also represent the Indian international effort that is going. So this is the machine that was set up at Science Institute of Nuclear Physics. And I was a physics person who was into computer simulation. But actually, I got into experiments and various things. I'm not going to go into details of these. So I focused on problem. I learned techniques and developed experimental systems to make sure the reactor starts to work. Sometime around 89, 19, about 2 to 3 years time, I could get this machine to work. And I kept adding more facilities to this, including power supply and other things, which were very expensive to buy at that time. There's another blog as to how I got into a data acquisition system that I developed. This is about how I became an accidental experimentalist, because I was a simulation person. And then I was invited to come to Gandhinagar. And in 89, this machine started to work, but it's not working properly. In 95, when I came, in about 5 days' time, I could get it to work. So we did many things. I was there for 7 years. I was also made project leader of this reactor. And so with both of these, the machine in Calcutta and Gandhinagar, I had the unique privilege of bringing the performance of both these machines to international standards. I also designed the control system of the new superconducting machine that was being built, which is being actually followed in ITER international project that is being done by contribution of all the countries. So this is a blog that describes what I did in the Aditya tokamak to bring the machine to high level of performance in about 5 days' time. This is showing how I learned from rural technology and helped the fusion reactor. This is another blog which shows that a small photograph helped me bring the machine from death. This is talking about a mystery of error fields in the machine. There's a blog which talks about dancing sparks. It was kind of a spark in the air that we were seeing and how we solved that problem. This was an accident that happened and how we recovered from that. What was the reason for that? These are blogs that I've written. And then recently, the Aditya machine has been upgraded after about working for 25 years into Aditya upgrade, Aditya U. And this started operation in sometime in January 2017. And the now performance is much better compared to the earlier version, and the new facilities have been also added to this. In mid-90s, when we're preparing to build the superconducting machine, the SST-1 tokamak, steady-state superconducting tokamak, this one at the bottom. At the same time, another 3 devices were being built in Asia, all Asian countries, Japan, China, Korea, and India. So not Europe or US. All this was happening in Asia. And actually, the Japanese had a much ambitious plan, which is the one that is on the right-hand side, this particular one. But this one is the Chinese one, and this is the Korean one. If I look at, forget the Japanese part, and if I compare the 3 machines in China and in Korea and India, there's a comparison that I'd like to show. This is the SST-1 machine that was built in Gandhinagar. First time it was assembled in 2005. Then there were technical problems. It was disassembled and reassembled after about 8 years in 2013. And if I compare the 3 machines, then what you would notice that the SST-1, this is the one in India, in Gandhinagar. The East is in China, and K-Star is in Korea. All of these were built around the same time with not too much difference. But if you look at the performances, China, as I mentioned, the temperatures they have achieved is much beyond what they had planned. Korea achieved 100 million. India, we planned for about 10 million, but to the best of my knowledge, we have not gone beyond 2 million. In India, we planned to achieve 1,000 seconds of discharge. We have not crossed even 1 second, whereas the other ones have proceeded much more. And recently, even in UK, there's a private company that has come up that has shown about 100 million degree temperature. Unfortunately, India hasn't made good progress since last 15 years or so. What has happened in the meantime is that there have been a lot of technological advancements in few areas, especially high temperature, high magnetic field superconductors, advanced manufacturing such as additive manufacturing. Fortunately, I'm chairman of the ICT committee to set up these across the country. And we have set up these facilities in Fab Lab across in my university. And then ICT requested me to chair a committee. Through this, we have set up this across countries. And today is very important in physics people to have these facilities. Also, extreme high power supercomputing modeling systems, also artificial intelligence algorithms. All of these are helping us today to realize the dream of nuclear fusion. And due to this, investments in privately funded fusion ventures has grown tremendously. I'll just show you an example. The one on the top is the project that I'm involved right now. I'll talk a little bit more about this. But you look at Commonwealth Fusion System, in fact, this figure is outdated right now. It's already more than, I think, $1.5 billion that's been invested. Another one, the one at the bottom, I think Helion Energy has also got $1.8 billion and so on. So a lot of funding is coming into private industry through investors. In our case, the project Sunland that I'm going to talk about a little bit, this, we had investment about $1 million promised by investor from US. Unfortunately, due to certain situation, the funding has stopped for the time being. But I'm going to talk briefly about what we are trying to do. I've called the name project Sunland because Sunland stands for fusion in Sanskrit. Nuclear fusion, we call it Navikiya Sunland. The first private initiative of this kind in India. In fact, only initiative among any university because there's only one center in the whole country that is in Gandhinagar. Outside that, this is the only other effort that is going on. I'm the chief mentor of this project. We are trying to develop nuclear fusion technology at 115 to 128 the cost of what is needed to develop similar in Western countries. While our target has been to produce energy, what we are trying to do is to use it as a neutron source or neutron factory in the early stage. So what we are trying to produce right now is a volume neutron source and use that neutron for three purposes. One is produce medical isotope. Second is to breed fissile fuel, that is convert thorium into uranium. And third one is to process radioactive waste of nuclear power stations. But of course, our long-term goal remains energy. Just to give a little bit more details on this, the medical isotope they're talking about, there's a particular medical isotope called technetium-99m. Technetium-99m actually is used for 85% of world's medical isotope requirement. And in US uses half of the world's requirement, but does not produce anything. There are about 6 fission reactors being used today to produce these medical isotopes. 5 of them are going to close in the next 8 to 10 years. There's one company in the US which is trying to do this through other methods, but right now not yet commercialized. So this is a huge shortage that we expect to see. And even today, the supply is not sufficient to meet the requirements. We did a calculation. We found that it costs about $3 billion to set up such a system. But the very first year, we'll get about $5 billion in return. So you put in $3 billion, the very first you get $5 billion. Then every year you keep getting $5 billion. The second one, breeding fissile fuel. As you are aware, India has the largest reserve of thorium, 25 to 30% of the world's reserve is in India. There was a news item about 8-9 years ago, which said that the monazite sand that is in Kerala region, which contains thorium, there was theft of that sand, and that theft was equivalent to 60 lakh crore rupees. 60 lakh crore rupees. So if I can convert thorium to uranium using this nuclear fusion process, according to one collaborator from US, he said that it will be like Saudi Arabia discovering oil wealth. That's the kind of wealth that it will produce for the country. Similarly, the last one, the processing radioactive waste. Nobody has a solution to processing radioactive waste. We dump it with half-life of 200,000 to 300,000 years. And actually, we believe that we have a solution for this also. This is the Commonwealth Fusion System set up by MIT group. This is trying to, has already successfully reported high temperature superconducting magnets that they want to do about by 2022. So they've successfully done that. Now they are moving into the next phase of preparing a machine, which they've called a Spark. And that is the smallest possible machine that they want to demonstrate. And the next one will be the one which will demonstrate commercial level of production. It will cost about $2 billion to set up. So this is the Commonwealth Fusion System. Another company called Lockheed Martin, which had claimed something about 6-8 years ago, but they had not been successful. This is the escalator in Germany that has been showing good progress. This is the initial confinement method where actually you are using laser beams to hit the DT pellets from all sides. There have been some good progress in this also. This is the National Ignition Facility in US where they have demonstrated break even. That means the amount of energy you're putting in is the amount of energy you're getting out of the system. I'll leave out these. There's another method of using proton-boron reaction, which does not produce neutrons, but this requires about 2 billion degree temperature. But there are some other methods that are being used. Some companies are also attempting this, one in Australia and one in US, which does not involve any nuclear waste at all. This is called aneutronic fusion. This is being done by a company near Los Angeles called TAE Technologies. They have been helped by AI-based algorithm of Google, which has led to seeing them a great improvement. This is talking about news item about how nuclear fusion is revolutionizing medical isotope. They're talking about this is a Phoenix Nuclear in US, which is trying to produce this. Fusion can also be used to propel space systems, so you can reach out to deeper space. So this is also useful from a space point of view. Various governments are coming up with ambitious plan to promote nuclear fusion, for example, UK, US, and so on. India, I'm trying to get government's attention. And some of you are closer to power in Delhi. You may be able to help me with this, is to get Indian government to actually differentiate between nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. Today, most of the policies are based on nuclear fission. So concluding the talk here, the nuclear fusion has been making headlines in recent couple of years, showing that it's close to realization. So the 20 years that we have been talking about is probably now come down to maybe 15 or so, or 12, 13 years. We expect that by 2035, which is the commercial realization of nuclear fusion, private investment has been growing around the globe in spite of uncertainties and cost of developing nuclear fusion technologies. And I was personally surprised when I got a request from US to start working in India. With 4 decades of experience, India should be able to develop this technology at a much lower cost, just like we did in IT sector. We could do this with proper partnership. So it is a momentous occasion for private initiative in a challenging area like nuclear fusion in India, and governments must come out with clear policy and incentive to promote nuclear fusion industry in India. So let's stop at this point. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity.
Thank you, sir, for your informative and interesting talk. Research in physics encompasses tiniest length scale to scales which are astronomical, like the sun, which is studied both in astrophysics and nuclear physics. Indeed, nuclear fusion is going to be the next generation source of energy and will place India on the world map. Rightly said, sir, we have challenges, but in spite of that, we have been able to achieve, continuously strive for achieving more, and with all the diligent efforts, we are going to succeed. Session is now open for interaction. Please raise your hand if you have any questions, sir.
There is a question here, compared to nuclear fusion, how efficient is nuclear fission as a source of energy? If I compare these two, the nuclear fission still has many issues that I talked about, that is waste disposal and chances of uncontrolled release. We have seen accidents happening in all parts of the world, whether it was in 3 Mile Island in US or in Russia or in Japan. But nuclear fusion is very safe. It does not require, it requires very simple things like water and soil. So it does not require any very difficult to get materials, raw materials. And as I mentioned that one of the focus that I'm trying to focus on is how to use fusion and fission in a combined way. That is using fusion to produce fissile fuel for fission reactors and provide that in the early stage. And then later on, you go to complete process of using fusion as energy. So that's what I'm talking about. There is a question about rural technology use. You can read my blog. I had seen my village, how when hand pumps were being installed, how they were doing it. I used that to solve a major problem of nuclear fusion, so that you can read in my blog. It says, sir, in the beginning, you said that there's some control ways of doing nuclear fusion. Can you explain how it can be performed? What does it mean by controlled nuclear fusion? Controlled nuclear fusion means that if you look at hydrogen bomb is uncontrolled release of energy. That means you can use for destructive purpose, but when you want to produce for peaceful purposes, you need to control the nuclear fusion reaction. And that's where our effort has been going for the last 70 years, is to confine the plasma into a volume using magnetic field. That's one of the methods. There are other methods. Using magnetic cage to confine this and produce very, very high temperatures, produce reaction, extract that energy out of this. This is what's called controlled nuclear fusion. What percentage of energy is coming out of nuclear fusion for accommodating the demand? Right now, nuclear fusion is not being used for any commercial purposes. We have not yet produced any commercial reactors, so there's 0%. But it is expected that if things go well, there are 3 scenarios. It was earlier expected by 2060 we'll have commercial use of nuclear fusion. But today I'm changing this to 2035, if not earlier. And so by 2045, we expect that 30 to 40% of energy will be produced through nuclear fusion process. But today this is 0%. So you mentioned that magnetic mirror and oscillator were combined. Can we also combine with tokamak and a better result be achieved? Well, my PhD work was combining magnetic mirror and oscillators. Can we also combine with tokamaks? Of course, each of these have used their own learning from each other. You can do a research work if some of you are doing PhD as to how you can take advantage of all of these together. When I was doing PhD, I used to actually talk about bad things of tokamak. And I used to say that, okay, magnetic mirrors are good, oscillators are good, and I can combine them. But then later on, I started working on tokamak as came back to India. So one has to learn from each of these. And there's a question about what you did to bring Aditya tokamak back to work in just 5 days. I think you read my blog, please. I've talked about this there in detail. But 1989, it was made functional, performance very poor. 95, when I came to Convenor, I was requested to look into what was happening because they had tried to get experts from all over the world to help it out. But then when I got a chance to work on it, in about 5 days, from Monday to Friday, I could get it to work. And then I was made project leader of that reactor. It's given in my blog. Thank you. Any other questions?
Urvashi?
Sir,
yes, sir.
The way the
First of all-
questions are, maybe just a minute, I would like to say something here. This was indeed very, I will not say interesting, but it was mind-blowing. We were so feeling when you were delivering the talk, it was giving a sense of pride also that in India, so many things are happening. And so India might become a leader in the technology in times to come. The way things have been happening and the way the questions are pouring, I'm sure, sir, many of the students, they might like to be your student only and work under you, because for whatever you have said, you have spoken, they were listening to everything. And that is why the questions are so specific to your talk, that what did you do in the 5 days, or whatever has happened, whatever was being talked about has been listened very carefully. So this is actually indeed the main role of holding such a conference, where we can engage our researchers, our students, because they are the future. And if they at this moment they start thinking in these lines, so I'm sure that the timelines that you are saying is by 2035, maybe you can still bring it down on it.
Thank you so much. I have to stop also here because there's another event that is already have to be there. They are waiting for me.
Sir, I think just one question, because one participant, she has raised her hand. So because I intervened, so they could not speak. So
Yeah,
give them.
please go ahead. The last question. Yeah, thank you.
You may ask.
Okay. First of all, sir, thank you so much for such an informative session. I have a question that a lot is invested in extracting nuclear fusion energy. So would this energy will be cost efficient for a developing nation like India?
So energy costs are independent of country. And obviously the early stage when you develop something, the costs are higher. And as you start to do it at a larger scale, the costs come down. So we believe that it will be cost effective. Otherwise commercial use will not be there. But first we have to realize it technologically, and then the economic part will also come in. So obviously economic role is going to be there. And the reason why, like I mentioned about medical isotope, which we are working on, is that $3 billion it will cost to set it up. But every year I get $5 billion return. So you see, there's an economic factor that is coming in because it's so costly. So energy has many factors in addition to what you see, direct cost, the indirect cost that we're suffering from, the global warming, everything that is happening. So obviously it has to be economic, otherwise it will not be commercially successful. So I'll stop at this point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for this lively interactive session.
And you can connect to my blog is there. You can read through those and you can connect to me. I'm very accessible. So thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, once again. I would like to request everyone to fill the feedback form, the link of which has been provided in the chat box.
Parul, what you can do is there are a few more questions in the chat box. So maybe you can share these questions with sir, and maybe he would, because he already said that he is accessible. So maybe he would give answers to these questions also. So yes, while sending a thank you letter to him, please send these questions.
Oh, okay, ma'am, sure.
So, Parul, can I take over from here?
Actually, I have to request for a group photograph with the sir.
But sir has already left.
Okay.
He was in a rush. That is why, we couldn't accommodate that request. So before we move on to the much awaited student prize distribution session, we would like to remind you that the annual conference Equinox is organized under the Aegis of Vantage Journal of Thematic Analysis. This is a peer-reviewed multidisciplinary journal that publishes original research article, reviews, opinions, perspectives, to name a few. Every issue of this journal revolves around a particular theme and critically discusses the theme from vantage point of various disciplines. Till now, we have published 4 issues of this journal. Vantage is an open access journal completely funded by Maitrey College. And hence, we do not charge any article processing fees, as we believe in the non-commercialization of knowledge. The upcoming issue of Vantage is on the same theme as the conference, Expanding Frontiers of Knowledge. So you all are welcome to submit your manuscripts to Vantage till 30th of August. As for students, we have 2 special programs in this journal. One is the book review session. The book review session, we publish in every issue some book review which has been done by students. And second is designing the cover page of the particular issue of Vantage. For designing the cover page, we also award the best cover page award with a cash prize. So please visit our website for more details. Will be shared. Dr. Meena Yadav has already shared the link of the website. Please visit our website to know more about it. I now hand over to Dr. Meena Yadav to continue with the program.
Thank you, Dr. Pradhati. So, the much awaited prize distribution event has finally come. A very good morning to one and all. First of all, we started this conference on 11th of August and witnessed fruitful academic deliberations Our speakers were par excellence, and so were the papers that were presented in the conference. So congratulations to all of you for successfully completing this 3-day event. However, the conference would not be complete without announcing the prize winners. So in total, we had 48 presentations, which were divided into 8 sessions, and all the sessions, they were run parallelly yesterday. So, we had a very hard time to decide upon the winners, but since we had to do it, it took us hours and discussions to come to the conclusion. So we have decided to give separate prizes for sciences and another for social sciences and humanities. So there will be, 2 separate categories. As a token of appreciation and motivation for students, we are giving cash prizes to the winners. The first prize winner will get INR 1,500, second prize 1,000, and third prize 750. So probably they will be credited to your accounts. So now the wait is over. I am now going to announce the names of the winners. So as I announce the names of the winners, I request the entire team to please keep your videos on so that we can take photographs of the winners. So first I'll announce for social sciences. For social sciences and humanities, the third prize goes to the presentation titled Fun But Never Funny, a critical literature review of women in comedy. The presenter was Rana Bedi from Amity University, Haryana. So can we have a round of applause for her? Thank you. The second prize in social sciences and humanities goes to the project titled Study the Impact of Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome on Quality of Life of Women in India. The authors were Riya Rao and Punika Tyagi from Maitri College. Congratulations, girls.
Thank you, ma'am.
The first prize goes to the paper Sustainable Fashion, Exploring Fashion in the Digitalized World. And the authors of the paper are Sanjana and Vanshika from Maitri College. So many, many congratulations, girls.
Thank you, ma'am.
Your hard work paid off. Now we move to the sciences. The third prize in sciences goes to elucidating the role of thyroid hormones during the development of zebrafish. The authors are Lakshmi Pillai, Shantanu Karmidekar, Kamya Pandya, and Aishwarya VM from MS University of Vadodara. So can we all see you? Get a photograph. Congratulations. Is anybody there here from the group?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Can you please switch on your video? We would like to take a photograph.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
As I told you, we had a very hard time. So for the second position in the sciences, we have a tie. So there are 2 projects which have been awarded the second prize. One is fabricated natural hydrogels and their potential for agricultural applications. The authors were Anita Kumari, Gitanshi Dang, Isha Bedwal, Kanishka, Nancy Ghai, Prachi, Savina, Umarani from Maitri College. Congratulations, girls.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
And the other project at the second position is Role of CQDs in Neurodegenerative Disorders. The presenter was Jyoti Ahlawat, a former Maitri College student who is now associated with the Chemistry and Biochemistry Department, University of Texas at El Paso. Congratulations, Jyoti. You are here? Jyoti Ahlawat?
I don't think she's been able to join because of the time difference.
Oh, she's very much there. She's waving.
Is she?
Please switch on your camera.
Yeah.
Jyoti, please switch on your camera.
No, it is on. The camera is on. I can see her.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody please,
Yeah, highlight her.
Hello.
Neeraj, can
Thank you very
Hi.
much.
Hi.
Yeah.
He's our student only. Congratulations, Jyoti.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
You're in Texas right now?
Right now I'm in California, so I'm working for a biotech company, which is IQ Biosciences, as a scientist level 1.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you very much, ma'am. All your blessings.
And the first prize in the sciences goes to build and design portable gaussimeter using Hall sensor A3144. Authors are Amanjot, Soumya, Ananya, Shiva, Apurva Verma from Maitri College. Many congratulations to you girls.
Thank you, ma'am.
You turn on your videos?
Yes, please. We need to have a photograph with all the winners.
Yes, all the winners can now switch on their video.
Yes.
We can have a photograph.
Winners and participants, all of you.
Dr. Meena, you forgot my name. I'm also that project. I'm Ritu Dhingra.
Yes, ma'am.
Basically.
Dr. Meena, the project was mentored by you, ma'am.
Yes, and I just want to convey one thing, that the jury member in that session, they just convey that they should go for the patent for that particular project, gaussimeter to design and the build.
Yes, the marks reflected it. They got really high marks.
Yes.
We're really proud that, such kind of work is being carried out in the college. So can you please all turn on your cameras so that we can have a group photograph? The winners as of now, and then the participants when we'll have the feedback session.
All the winners, please.
Okay, so, all right.
Thank you so much. So many congratulations to all the winners. Now we'll meet in Equinox 2023 the next year. So, but to conclude the event, I now invite Dr. Gopi D. Tripathi to convey vote of thanks. Ma'am.
Thank you very much, Meena. So it's unbelievable that the term is this program, this conference has come to an end. We've been working for it in a frenzy actually since January. So we finally come to the end of this 3-day conference, and our endeavor was to bring together diverse minds and create a meaningful dialogue around new ideas and perspectives across discipline. And I think I can say with confidence that over the past 3 days, we did have stimulating discussions and discovered forays into new frontiers of knowledge. And I think we got much more. We are taking back a lot more than what I've just said. This vote of thanks is going to be slightly long because it is a product of the collective effort of a large number of people. I begin by expressing our heartfelt gratitude to each one of the eminent speakers who opened the doors to the immense possibilities of explorations of new ideas and expansions of frontiers of knowledge. Sincere thanks to all the members of the editorial board and the advisory board of Vantage Journal of Thematic Analysis. Their advice and suggestions and support have been invaluable. We are thankful to all our participants, students, faculty, and research scholars who joined us and truly became seekers like us. Truly, your participation in whatever form enriched the conference and made it very meaningful. Our sincere and special thanks to our principal, Professor Ritambhara Hebbar, for thinking along with us and giving us the space to be creative. To Radhika for facilitating communication with speakers, dignitaries, universities across the country, and much more. A very heartfelt thank you to all the members of the organizing committee, without the sincere and tireless efforts of whom this conference would not have been possible. Dr. Jyoti Singh, Dr. Looney, Ms. Devangna Jha, Dr. Parul Yadav, Dr. Ghazala Ruhi, Dr. Tejender, Mr. Pavan Harsana, Dr. Neeraj Kumar, Dr. Aditi Narayani, Dr. Vijayini Mishra, and Dr. Anita. Please accept our deepest gratitude and love. You all made this possible. Words are not enough to convey the dedication, intense involvement, and the love with which CFR is held together by the young, energetic and driven Dr. Braudati Roy and Dr. Meena Yadav. They are the backbone not only of this beautifully organized and coordinated conference, but of CFR itself. A heartfelt thank you to both of you for conceptualizing and then actualizing this whole event. We thank everyone once again and look forward to seeing you all again next year in Equinox 2023. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We would now take, we would now have the feedback session and try to understand what the participants felt and take their suggestions, because this is an annual conference. So every year we would be organizing it. So we would really like if we get some suggestions from the participants on how to make it more, interactive, better in all directions. So participants who want to give their feedback, you can just raise your hand. We are going to unmute you and you can speak.
Bridgebone has shared something. There are some messages in the chat box.